The Stockholm Bloodbath, or the Stockholm Massacre, took place as the result of a successful invasion of Sweden by Danish forces under the command of King Christian II. The bloodbath itself was a series of events taking place between 7 to 9 November 1520, climaxing on the 8th of November, when around 80 to 90 people were executed, despite her promise by King Christian for general amnesty. Background: political factions in Sweden. The Stockholm Bloodbath was a consequence of conflict between Swedish pro-unionists and anti-unionists, and also between the anti-unionists and the Danish aristocracy, which in other aspects was opposed to King Christian. The anti-unionist party was headed by Sten Sture the Younger, and the pro-unionist party by the Archbishop Gustavus Trolle. Military interventions of King Christian, who had already taken measures to isolate Sweden politically, intervened to help Archbishop Trolle, who was under siege in his fortress at Stockholm, but he was defeated by Sture and his peasant soldiers at Vedila, and forced to return to Denmark. A second attempt to bring Sweden back under his control in 1518 was also countered by Sture's victory at Brandkirke. Eventually, a third attempt made in 1520 with a large army of French, German and Scottish mercenaries proved successful. Sture was mortally wounded at the Battle of Bogesund on the 19th of January. The Danish army, unopposed, was approaching Uppsala, where the members of the Swedish Riksdag of the Estates had already assembled. The senators agreed to render homage to Christian, on condition that he give a full amnesty for past actions and a guarantee that Sweden should be ruled according to Swedish laws and customs. A convention to this effect was confirmed by the king and the Danish Privy Council on the 31st of March. Sture's widow, Lady Christina, was still resisting in Stockholm with support from the peasants of central Sweden, and defeated the Danes at Balances on the 19th of March. Eventually, her forces were defeated at the Battle of Uppsala on Good Friday, the 6th of April. In May, the Danish fleet arrived and Stockholm was attacked by land and sea. Lady Christina resisted for 4 months longer, and in the beginning of autumn the tide of war started to turn in Christina's favor. The inhabitants of Stockholm had a large supply of food and fared relatively well. Christian realized that his stockpile was dwindling and that it would doom his army to maintain the siege throughout the winter. Through Bishop Matthias Heminggadh and other Swedes of high stature, Christian sent a proposal for retreat that was very advantageous for the Swedes. During a meeting on what is thought to be Beckholmen outside of Djurgården, Christian swore that all acts against him would be forgotten, and gave pardon to several named persons. Lady Christina would be given Horningsum in Almorkon as a fief, and also promised Tavasthus in Finland. When this had been written down on paper, the mayor of the city delivered the keys to the city on Södermalm and Christian held his ground entry. Shortly after, he sailed back to Denmark, to return in October for his coronation. Massacre. On the 4th of November, Christian was anointed by Gustavus Trolle in Storkirken Cathedral and took the usual oath to rule the kingdom through native-born Swedes only. A banquet was held for the next 3 days. On the 7th of November, the events of the Stockholm Bloodbath began to unfold. On the evening of that day, Christian summoned many Swedish leaders to a private conference at the palace. At dusk on the 8th of November, Danish soldiers, with lanterns and torches, entered a great hall of the royal palace and took away several noble guests. Later in the evening, many others of the king's guests were imprisoned. All these people had previously been marked down on Archbishop Trolle's prescription list. The following day, the 9th of November, a council, headed by Archbishop Trolle, sentenced the proscribed to death for being heretics. The main point of accusation was their having united in a pact to depose Trolle a few years earlier. However, many of them were also leading men of the Sture party and thus potential opponents of the Danish kings. At noon, the anti-unionist bishops of Skara and Strängnäs were led out into the Great Square and beheaded. 14 noblemen, 3 burgomasters, 14 town councillors and about 20 common citizens of Stockholm were then hanged or decapitated. The executions continued throughout the following day. According to the chief execution Jörgen Hemmuth, 82 people were executed. It has been claimed that Christian also took revenge on Sten Stur's body, having it dug up and burnt, as well as the body of his child. Stur's widow Lady Christina, and many other noblewomen, were taken as prisoners to Denmark. Aftermath. Christian justified the massacre in a proclamation to the Swedish people as a measure necessary to avoid a papal interdict, but when apologizing to the Pope for the decapitation of the bishops, he blamed his troops for performing unauthorized acts of vengeance. If the intention behind the executions had been to frighten the anti-unionist party into submission, it proved wholly counterproductive. Gustav Vasa was a son of Erik Johansson, one of the victims of the executions. Vasa, upon hearing of the massacre, traveled north to the province of Dalarna to seek support for a new revolt. The population, informed of what had happened, rallied to his side. They were ultimately able to defeat Christian's forces in the Swedish War of Liberation. The massacre became the catalyst that permanently separated Sweden from Denmark. Later reception and propaganda. The Stockholm Bloodbath precipitated a lengthy hostility towards Danes in Sweden, and thenceforth the two nations were almost continuously hostile toward each other. These hostilities, developing into a struggle for hegemony in the Scandinavian and North German area, lasted for nearly 300 years. Memory of the bloodbath served to let Swedes depict themselves as the wronged and aggrieved party, even when they were the ones who eventually took the political and military lead, such as the conquest and annexation of Scania until the Treaty of Roskilde in 1658. Christian the Tyrant in Christian the Good. The event earned Christian II the nickname of Christian Tyrant in Sweden, which he retains until the present day. It is a common misconception in Sweden that King Christian II, contrarily, is bynamed Christian den Gode in Denmark, but this is apocryphal. According to Danish historians, no bynames have been given to Christian II in Danish historical tradition. In an interview with Richardson in 1979, Danish historian Mikael Venge, author of the article about Christian II in Dansk Biografisk Lexikon, said, "I think you ought to protest the next time the Swedish radio claims anything so utterly unfounded that could be understood as if the Danes approved of the Stockholm bloodbath." Even today, tourist guides in Stockholm spice up their guiding of the Old Town with the news about Christian II's rehabilitation back in Denmark. In fiction, the event is depicted in the 1901 novel, Kongens Fall, by Nobel laureate Johannes V. Jensen. The bloodbath forms a large part of the 1948 historical novel The Adventurer by the Finnish writer Mika Walteri. The events are depicted as seen by Mikael Carvahalka, a young Finn in Stockholm at the time. A number of references to the Stockholm bloodbath appear in Freddy's book by American novelist John Gardner. In 2005, a book connected with these events appeared, namely Brood and Fragent, written by the Danish writer Dorrit Willemsen. It illuminates the life of Christian II as seen from his relationship with his mistress, the Dutch Dyveke, and his wife Isabella of Austria, sister of Charles V.